Slated Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. It's time for our Super Tuesday post-election day breakdown analysis. So we said yesterday that the cable news pundits would misframe the election results from yesterday, and we knew that because they always do. And they almost always get it wrong because they need a storyline now, like instantly, immediately, in real time as the results are coming in. They need a storyline. And the easy storyline last night, the easy one, was Biden won big. That's the simple, easy storyline, but that's not even close to the full story. By the way, I was last night I was watching. I'm in San Diego, so I was watching. It was like 11:50 or sorry 7:50, and the polls closed at 8 Pacific, and I was watching MSNBC, and there was a big countdown timer. All the cable news networks, big countdown timers for when the polls close in California. And then I was watching MSNBC, and it's like New Year's, like 5, 4, like to the second, 3, 2, 1, and then MSNBC does this huge graphic, has a picture of Biden and a picture of Sanders, boom, comes together, and it says, too early to call. It's like, guys, the polls closed literally 1 second ago. Of course it's give it a minute. But that's like, we gotta find out now. So, easy storyline. Biden won big last night. But, was it? Did he? He won big last night because the expectation of the week or two prior was that he wouldn't do well and that Sanders would win more states. In this weird primary journey, it's not about how well you objectively do. It's about how much you meet or beat expectations. And that's not an objective game. That's a completely subjective game. I'll give you a real example in real life, and then we'll bring it back to last night. So my wife just gave birth, like 10 days ago, our third kid. And everyone told her that the third kid is the easiest kid to give birth to. He'll slide right out, right? You go in, you may not even make it to the hospital. You probably give birth in the car, right? It's so easy. And he didn't slide right out. And my wife will tell you that the laboring process was not enjoyable. And by not enjoyable, I mean she pushed a human being out of her body, and it took many, many, many hours. It was not anybody's idea of a good time. So she'll tell you it was the hardest labor of the three. But objectively, was it harder? Was it harder than the first two? I don't think so. It was way harder than she expected. Right? The first kid was harder than she expected because she didn't know what to expect, right? So the first kid was like super painful, and then the second kid, she thought it would be the worst pain ever, and it wasn't as bad as she thought, so it was like super easy. And then this kid, she thought it'd be easy, and it was instead like insane amounts of pain for hours and hours and hours. So how do you analyze that, right? On a scientific objective scale of pain, all three kids were probably the same amount of pain. But that doesn't matter. I'm not gonna go tell my wife, you do it. I'm not gonna tell her that, oh, honey, it was just as painful as the other two. Like, I don't think so. So like that almost doesn't matter. It's all relative pain. And we do this all the time. We judge things based on their relative whatever, pain, fun, cost, right? Our relative feelings compared to our expectations. We do this with the cost of things all the time. I had to go to the cobbler. Sounds like I'm living in the 1800s or something. But I thought to fix my boot, I thought it was gonna be $80. And the guy said it was $50. And I was like, bah, that's great, $50. But if I went in thinking it was 20 and it was 50, I'd be ticked off, right? So everything's relative. Whenever I go to a movie now, which is almost never, but I always go in with low expectations. Every time in my life I've gone into a movie with high expectations, like, oh, this is gonna be the best movie ever. I've been waiting for it all year, it's gonna be amazing. It always stinks. But does it? Or is it just because it didn't meet my expectations? So now whenever I go to a movie, I always think it's gonna be terrible. And that way, at least I'm like pleasantly surprised a little bit. Anyway, you get that, right? We've all experienced that. But this is the case with politics too. 1984, Democratic primary, Gary Hart versus Mondale. Mondale was expected to crush in Iowa. He was like, he's gonna get 70% of the vote in Iowa. And he did well. He didn't get 70, he got 50%, which is great, right? He won, he still crushed everybody else. Gary Hart wasn't supposed to do anything, but he got 17% of the vote. Way better than expected. So he was perceived, truly, by the media, he was perceived as the winner of Iowa, even though he didn't win at all. Not even close, 17 to 50. By no other standard definition did he win other than, well, he beat the expectations. One guy didn't meet expectations, one guy beat expectations, right? Mondale won. But that's not the game. And then Hart had the momentum and then went on to win Vermont, New Hampshire. Whatever. Life's all about expectations. And I don't know, and this is for another day because I want to get to the last night, but I don't know if that's good or not, that we live this way, that we think this way. I don't know, this deserves a longer discussion, but I think it would be better if we judge things objectively and not always based on our expectations. I'll give one last example. The Mona Lisa, have you ever seen the Mona Lisa? Right, Mona Lisa, greatest painting known to man. Have you seen it in real life? You fly around the world, you fly to Europe to go see it. It's the highlight of your trip. You stand in line for hours, and you finally get in the room with the Mona Lisa, and it's like this big. It's like this little tiny thing, and you can't even see it because there's thousands of people around with their phones. And it's like this little tiny thing, you're like, oh, this isn't even that good. And then you go see the statue of David, and you don't really think that much about it. And then you see it, and it's huge, 17 feet, it's huge, tall statue. Like, this thing is unbelievable. So it's just expectations. Okay, so that being said, right, knowing now how we, and more importantly, how the pundits on cable news judge things, it's easy to see why last night, how the media judged Biden as the big winner. He certainly, I think, won more states and did better than anyone thought, at least anyone thought based off of last week or the last 2 weeks. But I don't know if he won. Objectively, I don't think he won. Are you comparing how he did? Are you comparing how Biden did to how you thought he would do 2 weeks ago? Right? Because if that's the case, then this is like the great resurgence of Joe Biden, the comeback, right? He's a phoenix rising from the ashes out of Iowa. Biden really, like to the point where, and I don't want to get too conspiratorial there, but to the point where maybe the media set him up for this. The media created this story arc of the down and out Joe Biden, right? Is this the end of his campaign? Should he just call it now? To set these super low expectations. Everyone counting him out and all the rest. Bernie's, like a clear front runner. Kind of count Joe Biden out, knowing he'd do way better than setting these super low expectations. And if you compare Joe Biden's last night performance with how everyone thought he would do 6 months ago, then you'd say, oh, geez, Biden did awful. He barely won Texas. He barely won Texas. He lost in these other states. He got crushed in California. What a terrible night for Joe Biden. And you'd be like, oh, Bernie Sanders, unbelievable. Look how well he did in Texas. Right? So it's all relative, and that's frustrating. So my point of all this, my suggestion is to be careful when comparing or analyzing a candidate's performance, because you got to watch out for what are you judging it based off of. And we're going to try to, from this point forward, having said all this, we're going to try to look at last night objectively. But it's really hard to do when everyone else in the media and everyone in cable news is telling you how someone did based off of their own expectations. And I fell for this. I fell for this during Bloomberg's first debate. I thought Bloomberg would be a total wet rag in that first debate, just awful. And he got like a zinger or two in. And I saw that, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. But I went in with this expectation of him just being like just awful. Most people went in with him, the mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg. Oh, I've heard so much about him. He's going to be the new guy, the front, blah, blah, blah. He must be amazing. And then he's stunk. And he didn't meet those expectations at all. So that's why everyone had different reactions about that debate, his first debate. So same thing with him today, right? Did he meet expectations? Did he not meet expectations? It's hard to find out the truth of what really happened. Let me talk about Bloomberg here for a minute from last night, and then we'll get into some more objective results from last night. Oh, he just suspended his campaign. Wow, look at that, beautiful. Reports are saying this is it. Okay, this is interesting. Look at that, perfect timing. I have no idea what Bloomberg's expectations were. I have no idea what his expectations were. Personally, I thought his plan was to get around 15%, right? That's the threshold that you need to get in order to get delegates, 15%. So I thought that he thought he would be getting around 15 to 20% in many different states. And I thought he thought the goal was to just sort of hang around until the convention and see what he can then buy off at the end. And if that was his expectation, then he did exactly what he needed to do yesterday. Maybe underperformed a little bit here or there, right? Some states he was around 14%, Some he got like 8, whatever. So he really needed to do like 2, 3, or 4% points better in different states to have a really effective night. But now he's suspending his campaign, which gets me thinking, wait. You thought you were gonna win? Bloomberg, you thought you were gonna get like 40% of the vote in different states? Oh, you're out of your mind. That was like, who thought that? No one thought that. Did you think that? Oh, wow, Bloomberg. Sorry, man, I didn't think that was, does that make sense? So again, just to put it back into the expectations game, if his expectation was he was gonna get about 15% of the vote, then he underperformed a little bit, but he's still kind of in there and can hang out till the convention. But if his expectation was he was gonna win, oh, geez, good night, man. You did terrible. You spent $500 million and you won American Samoa? That was your pick. By the way, when we get some time, and we don't have time today, I need to figure out how he won American Samoa. What happened there? Why do the American Samoanese, whatever, like Mike Bloomberg? What did his campaign do in American Samoa to pull out a major victory there? I don't know. We got to figure that one out. We need a reporter on the ground in America Samoa. Send Jesse Kelly to American Samoa. Get to the bottom of that. I mean, maybe he spent so much money there that people thought he was literally the only guy running. I don't even know. But wow, that's amazing. Like, his ego was so enormous. And we've been saying this a lot, but I didn't think it was that big even, that he thought he could buy California. He could buy a win in California, just like he bought everything in New York City. Right? He bought his mayorship in New York City. He just bought it. And he thought he could do that for the whole country too. That's amazing. Wow, he lived in such a fantasy land. And his world just came crashing around him. And reality punched him in the face. Unbelievable. Okay, so I don't care, that's fine. But it would have been more exciting if he stayed in the race though and had this big brokered convention thing and he was involved and throwing cash around. That would have been awesome. So I'm a little disappointed in that. Anywho, let's talk objective results next. Now it doesn't, this is interesting. So remember that 15% threshold that we're talking about? If you get above 15% in any state, that's how you become viable. That's how you become eligible to win any delegates. And if you're under that, then it's like you didn't even show up. The fact that he's dropping out now doesn't change the votes from yesterday. In California, right now he has, I'm not kidding, 14.9% of the vote. So whether he drops out, stays in, that doesn't matter, that happens. So he has 14.9% of the vote, and they're still counting votes. We're gonna talk about California next year. If he gets 15% of the vote, and it's gonna be like a week before we find out finally what happened in California, but if he gets 15% of the vote, then he's gonna steal a ton of delegates away from Bernie. So if you're a Bernie fan, even more than you're watching the votes to see how many Bernie gets, you're watching Bloomberg and hoping that he stays below 15%. That's amazing. Okay, let's talk about that next. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll break down California because if you want to look objectively at how yesterday went, you got to look at California. That's really all that matters because they have 415 delegates, way more than any other state by far. It's 10% of the entire delegate count of the entire country. So we'll talk about California next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Static Crusaders, we're continuing our post-Super Tuesday analysis. Let's talk about California. I live in San Diego, so we've been focused on California a lot here on my local radio show. And we got to focus on California because California is ridiculous, as always, and huge, unfortunately, and still part of America, unfortunately. So 415 delegates are at play here. 415. It's a lot. Like Virginia was also yesterday. That was North Carolina. North Carolina is 120 delegates, and Virginia was 99. And then it jumped up. Texas was like 230 or something, and then California 415. Okay, so way more than the other states. So of the 415 delegates, 144 of them are awarded to the statewide winners. If Bloomberg, whether he dropped out, doesn't matter. Yesterday still happened. If Bloomberg gets above 15% of the vote, and right now he's at 14.9% statewide. If he gets above 15, then he gets a share of those 144 delegates. If he stays below 15%, then all of those 144 will be divided up proportionally between Sanders and Biden. It could mean Sanders gets as much as 100 of those delegates and Biden gets 44. That's a huge delegate advantage. It's a 54 delegate advantage just on that one portion. That 54 delegate advantage for Biden is more than any single state advantage that Biden won yesterday. And that's only a part of the delegates awarded from California. Does that make sense? So Virginia has 99 delegates. Biden crushed Sanders in Virginia, 53-23. That's a huge dominating victory in Virginia. But Biden only got 35 more delegates than Sanders because they're awarded proportionally and other different factors as well. But Biden got 35 more delegates than Sanders. So he only, in Virginia, even though he crushed Sanders, Biden only increased his lead by 35 delegates. Biden, again, crushed Sanders in South Carolina. That was the big momentum shifter for Biden. But he got 39 delegates. Sanders got 15. So Biden only increased his delegate lead by 24. A lot, but not California numbers, not 100 or not 50. If Bloomberg stays below 15%, then Bloomberg stays below 50%, then Sanders can get over 50 more delegates than Biden just on the statewide popular vote category of California's delegates. That's a huge chunk. So the rest of the delegates, 271, those are awarded based on who wins each congressional district in California. California has 53 different congressional districts, and each one is awarded between 4 or 7 delegates, depending on who gets the most votes. It's the same thing as statewide, just on each little congressional district. So if you get above 15% in each congressional district, you get at least 1 delegate. So I looked at the map of California. Biden won a handful of counties. I was looking at county maps, so that's probably pretty close to the congressional maps. But if you look at the counties, Biden won like 5. Don't quote me on that, but like ballpark, just like a handful of counties, which means Bernie is going to win almost all of those congressional districts and get a vast majority of those 271 delegates. So Bernie, really all yesterday mattered was California when it comes to delegate counts, which is, gosh, you would think all that would really matter, but the media wants to make these big storylines, right, about momentum and all this stuff. We'll talk about that coming up in the last segment, momentum, bandwagon voters, stuff like that. But if you're just looking at delegates, California is all that mattered yesterday, and Bernie did amazing in California, if you're a Bernie fan. One quick thing to know, California takes forever to count their votes. It'll take about a week. And there's a lot of reasons for that we don't really need to go into now, other than California's a super corrupt, inept state. But again, this is sort of expectations as well. So in Iowa, we expected the results instantly, and it took a week, and everyone's like, well, Iowa's the worst. In California, we know it takes a week, so no one's really freaking out about our broken election process, right? But things change. Things change over this week. In the 2016 Democratic primary in California, by 2 a.m. Eastern on election night, or primary night, Clinton was up on Sanders by 21 points. And by the end of the week, she ended up winning only by 7. So Clinton lost 14 points over the week of just counting votes that people drop off the day of, or bring them to the wrong polling station, or go to the wrong polling station. And you'd be surprised, it takes a long time to count the ballots from dead people. Longer than you think it would. So anyway, so objectively looking at results from last night, and that's how we're going to do it moving on, objectively. Sanders crushed California, and that's what matters. Let's just take Oklahoma. Biden won by a lot, 39-25 in Oklahoma. Big win for Biden in Oklahoma. He won every county. But in the end, Biden got 18 delegates, Sanders got 12. So Biden wins Oklahoma. Oh, he won Oklahoma, big deal. He got 6 delegates. Like, whatever. 6 delegates, like, Sanders could win 6 delegates, get a 6 delegate lead over Sanders. Sanders could get a 6 delegate lead over Biden in one of the 53 congressional districts in California. California is it. Even in Texas, the results are still coming in from Texas, right? Sanders was, early in the night, he was ahead in Texas, but then some of the big cities, actually, this is interesting. Quick little heads up. if you're watching election results, when you're watching them coming up, well, I guess the rest of the primary season here and the general, you can't, so it'll say like Texas, 20% of precincts reporting or something like that. It depends entirely on where those precincts are. So you can't just say, oh, 20% are in, it's going to continue at this trajectory. Not even close. It depends where the results are coming in from. So when Sanders was up early in the night in Texas, it was because it just so happened that the votes were counted on the border counties, which is where more Latinos were voting, and there are more Bernie supporters. Sanders does better there. And later, it was later in the night when more of the inner cities where the black voters were counted later. So Biden got this narrative, the story arc of a come from behind win, come from behind victory in Texas. And that's another expectations game, another momentum win for Biden, which is what the mainstream media, lamestream media is talking about today. Right? Imagine, and this is so goofy that this is true, but it is. Imagine if last night, if they counted the votes in Dallas first. All right, Biden won in Dallas 37-27. Right? So imagine if they counted those votes first, and all the news last night started with, wow, Biden looks like he's going to come out with a commanding victory in Texas. And then all of a sudden, there's a late surge late at night with Sanders because they count the votes on the border last. Right? So Sanders comes from a big late, come from behind, makes it really close, right? And then the cable news narrative would have been completely different. But the narrative that they could fit today, last night, which was Sanders in the lead, oh wait, Biden comes in, oh, Biden for the victory. That just happened because of the luck of the draw. It was the luck of what votes were counted first. Really interesting how that could change the entire narrative of how cable news portrayed it. Anyway, Biden did win Texas, 228 delegates, but he's still only going to get a little bit of a lead out of it when it comes to delegates count, right? Because it was so close. Biden won, but he only won by a little bit, so he's only going to get a few of the delegates over Bernie. Now, when it comes to Bloomberg, again, he dropped out, but the votes still count from yesterday. So California, Bloomberg is at, right now he's hovering at 14.9. So he's under 15, which is going to help Sanders. In Texas, Bloomberg's hovering at 15.1% of the vote. So at this rate, he's going to take delegates away from Biden, because now some of those delegates are going to have to be distributed to Bloomberg. So we'll see how both those shake out. As we're watching Texas and California results come in, don't only look who's in the lead, but also look how many votes Bloomberg ends up getting, whether or not he gets above that 15% threshold. By the way, can we, before I forget, can we do Trump's tweet? Let's do the first one here. This is Trump last night. He said, Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren, other than Mini Mike, was the loser of the night. She didn't even come close to winning her home state of Massachusetts. Well, now she can just sit back with her husband and have a nice cold beer. Oh, that's so good. We haven't even talked about Elizabeth Warren. We'll talk about that with our guest next, with Will Ricciardella. Poor lady. She even sent out a PR press release yesterday saying she's going to stay in. Why? You egomaniac. What are you doing? You're taking votes away from Bernie. All right, Klobuchar and Buttigieg, they got out. They went to Biden. They did it because they're going to get some cabinet positions. Klobuchar leaving early gave Minnesota to Biden. And Warren couldn't even win her home state. She's a sitting senator in Massachusetts. Like right now, she's a senator, and she got third. That's not just relatively bad based off of expectations. That's objectively terrible. Good night. And that's sad for me personally, because now Trump's not going to do my favorite stand-up routine at his rallies anymore. His Pocahontas routines were my favorite, and I don't know if he'll do them anymore. I'm sure I'll fit him in somehow. I hope he does. For comedy's sake, I hope he keeps him in. All right, so Trump sent out a second tweet here. Let me pull this one up. The biggest loser tonight by far is Mini Mike Bloomberg. His political consultants took him for a ride. $700 million washed down the drain, and he got nothing for it but the nickname Mini Mike and the complete destruction of his reputation. Way to go, Mike. Oh, that's so great. Way to go is awesome. That's such a good line. Oh, man. In all seriousness, though, this should be encouraging to all of us that someone can't buy the election, that someone can't buy votes. You can buy political consultants, you can buy endorsements, you can buy silence, but you can't buy votes. It would be very discouraging if Bloomberg did really well in California, say, by just dumping hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, he did buy votes. He got 450,000 people voted for him in California. But do we have this picture? Check out, this is Bloomberg's downtown LA office space. Look at that. Have you ever worked in a political campaign before? No political campaign office looks like that. That looks like an Anthropologie. He has 25 field offices across California, more than anyone. He spent $77 million on TV and radio ads. Sanders spent $8 million. His staffers, his just regular staffers, low-level staffers are paid $18 an hour. We read a couple weeks ago, we talked about how his top staff, they were all given iPad Pros, catered meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. His campaign rallies had open bar. They were catered with an open bar. Unbelievable. There's a 538 reporter who was in LA. He was trying to find a Bloomberg supporter. He couldn't find one. And he said, by the time I did stumble upon a Bloomberg fan, I felt like I'd sighted a rare bird in the wild. So there are none, even though he's throwing money around. Bloomberg spent $560 million on ads across Super Tuesday states. Just on ads. $560 million. Tom Steyer spent $210 million, and Biden spent $16. That's it. $560 million versus $16 million. So I think that's really encouraging that Bloomberg and Steyer, these billionaires, thought they could buy votes and they couldn't. Not even close. And that's why I love whenever Trump says to Mini Mike, he always says, "Not as easy as it looks, huh, Mike?" I love that line. David Irsani said we're supposed to believe that the Russians could steal a presidential election with $100,000 in Facebook ads, and Bloomberg can't buy a delegate for $500 million. Way to go, Mike. So that's all the California news we have. Wait a week, but it looks really, really good for Bernie in California. And objectively speaking, that washes out all the other wins for Biden across the state. Coming up next, we got a few other states to talk about. We're going to talk to Will Ricciardel from the Washington Examiner. We'll break down in greater detail some of this stuff. We'll look forward. And I want to do a big general analysis on bandwagon voters. We'll do that next because it's momentum, right? So we'll talk about bandwagon voters. Who are these people? And what really motivates them? We'll do that all coming up. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Cider Crusaders, I want to bring in our friend Will Ricciardel, social media director of the Washington Examiner. And I love talking to Will because every time I hear someone mispronounce his name differently, he always says, "That's fine." Like, just like a whole life of like, whatever.
Whatever.
Will, how are you, brother?
You know? Good. I'm good, thank you.
It's like it doesn't matter. Just Will's fine. All right, brother, what do we got? Let's big takeaways before we get to the in great detail. So what's your big takeaway from yesterday?
So the last time I came on, we talked about South Carolina. That was the last primary before Super Tuesday. I said, look, if turnout's big, it's going to help Joe Biden. Turnout was big, it helped Joe Biden. That was the first domino. Now you have all these other states falling. People are talking about, this is a big shock for Joe Biden. It's really not. He was leading in national polls. He's always been strong in national polls. Bernie has a very strong following. A lot of those people don't turn out. They're very young people in college. They're not reliable voters. Bernie has a more reliable voting base. Biden has a more reliable voting base. So this wasn't that much of a surprise to me. Which was a surprise was Texas. I mean, here's a state that Hillary won handily in the primaries in 2016, and Bernie almost beat Biden. And so Texas is going through a big change.
Yeah, talk more about that. Break down what you know out of Texas.
Look, it's turning left. God only knows how much longer it will be a Republican state. Ted Cruz had a hard time winning there in 2018 against Beto O'Rourke. The party in general is shifting left. This is why Biden has had a hard time in debates. He's not that kind of. The party's changed so much in 10 years that Joe Biden's relatively lost, and we've seen that in the debates. He'll be able to clean this up a little bit better when it's just him and Bernie one-on-one. But still in all, will he be able to get that fundraising he'll need to beat Trump if he can't win this far left progressive base of the party. I mean, this is not, I hate to say progressive, it's a socialist base of the party.
Yeah. I'm so discouraged by Texas, and I haven't been in a while until you brought it up again. Thanks a lot. But the idea that Texas could become a blue state is like, what are you talking about? And that would be the end of presidential elections. I mean, forget it if that happened.
Oh, yeah, and look, Bernie's not a socialist. He's not a democratic socialist. He's a communist. I mean, everybody's parsing words. The man's a communist. He sympathized with communist regimes. He is an authoritarian. If you want, most of his policies involve authoritarianism or some sort of property theft. I mean, no one's saying it, but they should be. You know, that should like concern a lot of Americans that a communist is doing this well in a major party in the United States of America, particularly in Texas, that was once a reliably red state.
Yeah, I'd say. What about, you mentioned before about expectations. So we've talked about that the whole show today. We talked about expectations, and most of life is if you meet them or if you don't meet them, as opposed to just looking at the objective reality of what happened. So there is this narrative that was created these last 2 weeks that Biden is out and he'll never come back and he's way down and way down. And then he did way better than expected, right? Based on the last 2 weeks, if you look at just the last 2 weeks. But as you mentioned, he's been the front runner like the whole time. And if you do if you look at last night based off of where we thought he'd be last year, then maybe he didn't even do as well as he should have in a lot of these states. Like he barely won Texas when maybe he should have run away with it. What do you think about that based off expectations?
Well, the thing is, there's nobody in the party that anybody's enthusiastic about. No one's enthusiastic about Joe Biden. They're enthusiastic about Bernie Sanders. It's a relatively few people, but the enthusiasm's really low. A lot of people are talking about him picking Klobuchar as a running mate now, and that she's, the front runner to be his running mate. Who could you pick that's more boring than Amy Klobuchar as your running mate? I mean, the ticket's very sleepy. Joe Biden, he is sleepy. He's very sleepy. It's very boring. The only thing exciting about him is his gaffes, and people like that. It's endearing. It comes off as endearing to a lot of people. Joe is Joe, and people like that. But it's a very boring ticket. No one's really that enthused about him. Look, some of this still is the anti-establishment sentiment of 2016. That's where Bernie's following comes from. You couldn't pick a more establishment candidate than Biden, and you can't pick a more establishment candidate than Amy Klobuchar. So they're incredibly boring, and they'll have a tough time beating Donald Trump in a general election.
Yeah. One reason I love talking to Will is I'll throw a theory out to him, and he's not afraid to be like, no, that's wrong, you're an idiot. So I'm going to throw my director, Eric, here under the bus. He said that Warren is actually the establishment hack, right? So Klobuchar and Buttigieg dropped out of the race before Super Tuesday. They didn't just wait it out to see how they did. They dropped out to endorse Biden to, they're going to get a promise of some campaign job or whatever. But Warren, she did the opposite. She's staying in the race to take votes away from Sanders and help out Biden to get some payoff at the end, maybe a VP slot or something else in the end as well. What do you think about that?
Look, I thought about that too. I mean, that was his, Liz Warren was, really hurt Bernie badly yesterday, particularly in Massachusetts. Look, they probably split the commie vote in Massachusetts, okay? Biden won there. Liz Warren couldn't even win her own state. What's she still doing in the race? I mean, I'd like to know what communications maybe she had with the DNC, with her own party, the leaders, Chuck Schumer and the leaders of the party. But look, if this is what Democrats want to do, that's their prerogative. I'm tired of people saying they're stealing the election from Bernie in the Democratic primaries and so on, and how Democrats elect their presidential candidates. They have it like this way for a reason, so that a communist can't be the leader of their party. So I think that's a relatively good thing for the United States of America. I don't know why people, particularly conservatives, keep saying, oh, they're stealing it from Bernie, as if they want a major American party to actually have, to nominate a communist. I find that to be a very scary thing.
For the record, when I asked Will what he thought about one of my theories, he said it was stupid. When I asked him about your theory, he thought it was
Hey, I'm not afraid. Right. I'm not afraid, but your director's theory is not a bad one. I'd like to confirm it.
Glad we had you back on, Will. Let's talk about Bloomberg here for a minute. So again, expectations game. I thought he would do. So not only did I think he would get about 10 to 15% of the vote in all the states, I thought he would get about 10 to 15%. But now I'm thinking, oh, did he really think he would win states? Was he under the expectation that he would win California? What do you think?
He did well, and he got almost nearly 500,000 votes in California. Look, the last time I came on, I said, he's a disruptor. That's basically what he is. He's a spoiler. He hurts Biden to some degree. I'm sure the establishment would like to see Bloomberg drop out too. And maybe that's why, to some degree, Liz Warren stayed in the race, is to even that out a little bit. I think it would be embarrassing for the Democrats to have a Bernie at the top of the ticket. Beto O'Rourke certainly understands Texas, and doesn't want a Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket. That could hurt down ballot. So that's really what Democrats are kind of afraid of, particularly after the Russia collusion, conspiracy theory, and then you had the Ukraine stuff. That there's House seats that are up for play, and they're worried about losing them. And if Bernie's at the top of the ticket, they may just do that.
Yeah. Let's talk about, let's do a quick prediction. So we got Michigan next week, we got Florida, Pennsylvania coming up, we still got some big states. How much are voters influenced by this bandwagon effect of, Biden's the guy now? And how's Michigan going to go? Because last polls I saw 2 days ago, it was 30% Sanders, 20% Biden.
Well, quite a bit, but it could go two ways. People could think that Biden's the winner and not turn out, and Bernie Sanders supporters do, and he wins. Or this could be, again, more the domino effect. Now I like Biden. People like to pick at the last minute, so that tends to be what they do. So a lot of those people that were leaning Bloomberg, Liz Warren, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, go in and vote for Biden now. But again, like I said, the other side of that coin is, Biden's the nominee, now I don't have to turn out. So, Bernie Sanders supporters are going to turn out. So it could go either way. Anybody who predicts this stuff just doesn't know what they're talking about.
So give me a prediction about Florida then.
Gosh. Florida, if I had to pick, I'd say Biden. I mean, I just don't think his comments, look, no one's talked about Bernie's comments on Cuba. I don't think that helped him in any of the states.
That'd be amazing.
That controlled the news cycle. And I just don't think that's going to work with voters in Florida. I think Biden wins. But again, predicting these things is relatively difficult. Maybe those people in Florida think he's a presumptive nominee and they're busy. They're going to be, they already made plans maybe on the day they're supposed to vote in their primary. Who knows?
Let's look forward to personality matchups in debates and just campaigning in general with Sanders versus Trump. How does that look? And maybe the big question here is, who does Trump want to go against?
Trump, I think it's easy. Trump wants to go against Bernie Sanders. His policies, like Bernie Sanders is a catchphrase candidate. He talks about everything being free. That's kind of easy. I think the reality of a lot of blue-collar Americans, people that Bernie Sanders has to win, is that nothing's free. No one knows that better than Americans in the Rust Belt. So they know that if government takes control of their health care, it's going to be basically like the DMV, just more expensive. No one ever says, hey, do you want a government car? You know what I mean? Do you want government food? Everyone's going to say no. Blue-collar people understand this better than anyone else. And Donald Trump speaks blue-collar language. He's a billionaire who speaks blue-collar language. Bernie Sanders is going to have a really hard time running against that, particularly in a debate.
Yeah. So I always thought that Biden, and I may miss this. I may be off on this one, but I always thought that Biden would go against Trump pretty well because Biden has this kind of, whether it's phony or authentic, whatever, but he's like this, every guy, I take the train from Delaware, kind of like I'm the blue collar guy, and I thought that kind of would go well against Trump. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. Look, the problem Bernie Sanders is having now in debates is this isn't the Democratic Party of 5-10 years ago. He has people to the left of him that just use, like Bernie, that says things should be free, this should be free. That used to be how Biden would run. If you remember in 2012 against Paul Ryan was very specific on policy. Joe Biden was just using catchphrases. Now Joe Biden has the same problem that Paul Ryan had in 2012. People are saying things should be free, and now he has to be the policy wonk when he defends Obamacare. So when he gets up against Donald Trump, I think he'll have an easier time of it. So he's been really disparaged a lot in the media, in the Democratic Party, of how his debate performances have gone, but no one's really thought about how much the Democratic Party has shifted. Here's a guy who's been in it for 40 years. It's kind of, the progressive wing has kind of pulled it away from him. But I think once he starts debating Donald Trump, he can kind of pick up that blue-collar moniker again and say, hey, I'm the guy that fights for blue-collar people I have for 40 years.
Wow, what a good point. You're right. You throw this guy in there who's been doing it one way, and then all of a sudden you put Biden in there and say, hey, defend taxpayer-funded sex change operations for prisoners. It's like, wait, what? When did this become a thing?
Exactly.
All right, Will, any final thoughts here?
No, look, I think this is going the way it was supposed to go from the beginning. I think media gins this up, obviously, because of they want to see the Bernie, Liz, and Biden thing. But Biden's been the clear front runner. He hasn't really dipped that much in the polls. Iowa, New Hampshire, those weren't really representative of the rest of the states. Biden has minorities in hand. Bernie Sanders can't win them. It's going to be a really hard go for Bernie moving ahead.
I think that's all right. Will Ricciardella, social media director, Washington Examiner. What's your Twitter?
At Will Ricci, WILLRICCI.
Thanks, Will. We'll talk again, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
True story. Mike Slater. More coming up. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I want to wrap up with these thoughts here because Will brought up a really interesting point about how do Sanders voters respond? How do people respond? The primary system is really interesting because it's spread out over time, and how people perform and what other states do, what voters in other states do, affects how other people behave in their primary, right? So election night, it's one night. This is your night, and everyone votes at the same time. So that effect doesn't apply to the general election, but it does for primaries. So it's a really fascinating thing to look at. So Will was talking about, at the end there, he said, well, how do Bernie Sanders, how does he respond, but how do his voters respond, right? Do they get super ticked off and vote even harder? I guess that's how Bernie, it depends how he responds, right? Is Bernie gonna roll over and be like, well, we did okay, let's see how we do? Or is he gonna get fired up at the establishment and fire his base up? How are the Biden supporters in Michigan going to respond next week? Are they like, oh, it's in the bag now, right? Because we talked earlier about story arc and how the media, I think, perhaps created this story arc of, oh, he's setting expectations really low, right? Oh, Biden, is his campaign over? What is he going to do? He can't recover, knowing that he would do pretty well in Super Tuesday to create this grand story arc of, oh, the comeback kid, right? So maybe, though, it's going to backfire now. Maybe he's like, oh, the presumptive nominee, he's walking away with his supporters in Michigan are like, man, I don't got to vote today, it's cold. So how do these different variables affect people's behavior in Michigan? Really interesting. So there's two kinds of voters. For lack of a better word, we'll call them the principled voter. There's a better word there somewhere, but we'll call them the principled voter or the bandwagon voter. It's an interesting phenomenon, and I don't know if it's good or not. I'm inclined to think it's not, but I could be convinced either way. It's called information cascade and herd behavior. There's a lot of literature on this, and it can really get in the weeds. But I think this is the easiest example. So imagine you and your wife, and this has happened before, you and your spouse, you're walking around downtown, you're looking for someplace to eat dinner. And you come to a corner, and there's two restaurants right next to each other. And it's super early. It's like 5 o'clock. But you're hungry. But it's 5 o'clock, so they're both empty. And you don't know which is better. Where do you go? Do you go there or do you go there? And you're like, man, I don't know. So you randomly choose A. You're like, let's go to that restaurant right there. So then another couple comes by, and they're faced with the same choice. And they don't know which to go. But they see that one restaurant's empty. And they're like, oh, that must not be any good. There's people in this one. This one must be better. So that second couple, they make the assumption, the bad assumption, the unwise assumption, that the first couple has more information and therefore made the better choice. Like, oh, like those people must have known something that I don't, choosing restaurant A. So therefore it must be better, I'm gonna go there too. And then the cascade starts, right? So the next couple comes, and then the next couple, and then the next couple, and then you have a big crowd in restaurant A, and there's no one in restaurant B. Every couple all night now, they come and they assume that everyone before them made the rationally objective, or the rational, objectively right choice. Right? This restaurant is so much better than B. And if they only knew really that the first couple chose restaurant A because the guy really had to go to the bathroom and this one was 10 steps closer, right? And like that's really, he didn't choose it because the food's better. He didn't choose it because he knew anything different. He didn't choose it because it's the best restaurant in town. He chose it because he really had to go to the bathroom and he could see the bathroom sign. And like, we're gonna go there, right? That's it. So it's herd mentality, information cascade. Momentum in these elections, unfortunately, I really think it's not good. I don't know, I'm curious if you have a different take, but I'm gonna go with that. I think it's unfortunate that momentum is so important, right? How many people on Super Tuesday states were influenced to vote for Biden because of how well he did in South Carolina? It shouldn't make a difference, right? It shouldn't. If you're a voter in Colorado, how Biden did in South Carolina should make zero difference, right? You either like Biden or you don't like Biden. Who cares what the people of South Carolina think? But there's so many bandwagon voters. And if you're a principled voter, you don't care. I'm gonna vote for my guy. I'm gonna see how it shakes out. But there's so many bandwagon voters. I don't know what percentage of voters are bandwagon voters or not. But the bandwagon voters are like, oh, he's showing momentum. And then they use that as their rationale. And they use words like he's electable, right? That's when people say electable, that's what they really mean. People rationalize it by saying, oh, he has the best chance to beat Trump, or he has the best chance to unify the party. But really, people just like to join the crowd. So again, two types of voters, the principled or the bandwagon. And just, again, this doesn't apply to the general because everyone votes at the same time. So Biden benefited from a lot of bandwagon voters. And we'll never know the full effect of it, right? The only way you could ever know the full effect is if there were two alternate universes operating at the same time. So the big primary next week's Michigan, 147 delegates. Third biggest behind, so it's California, then Texas, then Michigan, right? So this will be the third biggest so far. The Michigan Democratic voters, as of yesterday, 30% were for Sanders, 20% for Biden, 15% for Bloomberg. Bloomberg dropping out now is going to change a lot of that calculus as well. So we'll have to add a third dimension operating. But let's say Bloomberg was staying in, just for the sake of this point about bandwagon voters. How many Bloomberg voters would say, he has no chance now, I'm going to go with Biden, right? That's a bandwagon voter. Versus how many people would say, no, Bloomberg's my guy, no matter what. Who cares what they think in West Virginia or Virginia? I'm voting for Bloomberg. So how many people, here's the question, how would the people in Michigan have voted if the election was yesterday versus the election being next Tuesday? And it's weird that the results are very different, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you'd think it'd be the same no matter what, but it's not. It's amazing how much of an impact other people have on my vote. It's amazing how many other people have an effect on the people in Michigan's vote. But we're social creatures, so we like to travel in packs. Do I have a second to explain this? Yeah, I got a minute. So the classic example of this, I'll do this real quick. We should do a whole segment on this because I reference this a lot. But the Osh conformity experiment. So what they did, it was like 50 years ago. Take a group of people, and everyone's in on it except for one person. And the scientist shows the group a picture of a line. Say the line is like this long. And then shows a picture with 3 other lines of different lengths. One's this long, one's this long, one's this long. Right? And then they ask the group of people, which of these lines, A, B, or C, is the same length as this original line? Now the answer is obviously B. It's not even close, right? Like line A is this big, line B is this big, line C is this big, and it's clearly line B. But everyone in the group, they're all actors. They're told to intentionally say the wrong answer. Now the camera's focused on the person who's the subject, right? And the answer is clearly B. And they go around the room, and the actor says, which line's the same length? I'm gonna go with line A. And the person who's being watched is like, what are you talking about? Huh? And then they go around the room, and every actor's like, oh yeah, it's A. They go around the room, and then they get to the subject, who clearly knows it's B, and you can tell by their facial expressions, like, what's wrong with everyone? They know the answer's B. So the question is, how many of those subjects give the wrong answer? How many of those subjects conform to the group? 75%. 75, and they did it a bunch of times, right? They'd go around the room like I think it was 18 times, with the first 2, they gave the right answer. So it was 16 times. But anyway, at least once, 75% of the time, the person gave the group answer in order to conform. And I just want to be clear, it could not be more obvious what the right answer was. So how you would respond in that situation, if you were there, is entirely dependent on your personality. Do you care what other people think about you? If you do, then you will probably conform to the group and give the wrong answer. And some people get a kick out of not conforming, right? Some people like to be contrarian, right? So in that case, if you're that person, you'd get up and be like, wow, you're all a bunch of idiots. It's B, you dopes. So the question is, how strong are the social forces externally operating on people to vote a certain way? How strong are they? Good thing voting's secret, right? If there wasn't a secret ballot, then this effect would be way stronger. But how influential is the media in telling every Democrat what to do, right? How influential is the media saying, listen, Democrats, it's so obvious that you need to vote for Biden. Obviously, he's the best person to beat Trump. It's going to be really interesting to watch. And we'll do a segment on this tomorrow because I guarantee you I'll get some examples of this today because they need to set this up already. But the media today will frame Biden as the moderate candidate, right? Biden's no moderate. And we'll talk about it tomorrow. I guarantee I'll get a bunch of examples today of the media trying to do this. We'll give some examples tomorrow. But the media is going to start talking about Biden as some sort of fiscal conservative and a centrist and a coalition builder. So it's total nonsense. But how effective will that be in tricking Democratic voters to vote for him in Michigan and Florida and Pennsylvania and these big states to come? And the stronger the media goes in for Biden, because they will, obviously, the stronger they go in for Biden, how does the Sanders crowd react? They may get stronger. They may get more angry. They may get more energized. If you're a Trump supporter, you don't want this to be over, right? You want Bernie to get fired up. You want Bernie to fire up his supporters. You want Bernie to call out the biased media. You want Bernie to attack moderate Joe. And you want irreconcilable harm to be done between the Sanders voters and the Biden team to crush any potential enthusiasm that the Democrats may have coming into November. You want this party to keep going. There's already major fault lines in the party. Black and Hispanic voters, young and old. By the way, good news for America, young people still don't vote. Some exit polls show 13% of the voters are between the age of 18 and 29. So there is no like this Bernie electorate of young voters getting out there to vote, which is good. We don't want those people voting. But the point is, there's already major fault lines. And we'll see, based how Bernie reacts and how Bernie supporters react, if those fault lines get even bigger in the next few weeks. So I look forward to see how Bernie reacts. Is he going to roll over, or is he going to fight back twice as hard? Still lots to do. That's it for us today. I got to go. We could talk all day, but we got the rest of the team still coming up. We got Dana, we got Buck, we got Jesse, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.